That's all there is to it. It's a simple little melody written by Cantor Marcelo Gindlin at the Malibu Jewish Center and sung by the members of that community in the aftermath of all the destruction that they experienced during the fire that sent so many of them into great pain, fear, distress, and as a community caused them to head into deep rebuilding. And so it's very simple. We're going to sing it together. It's call and response. So all you got to do is listen to what I sing and sing it right back to me. Vehinei hasneh haboeh ba'esh vehasneh
The image on the screen was complete darkness, but one little light shone down in the valley, and the crest of the screen was burning red. It was dark outside, there was nothing else on the screen. My husband said, "That's my school." One little light from the office was shining, and all we could see was the crest on fire above. And he said, "It's over." And I said, "It's not." And he said, "It's over." And so we watched as the sun started to rise, and we continued to watch and continued to stare at the screen, and then they said, "It's on fire." It's literally on fire. And the news starts showing buildings burning down. And he's like, "It's over, it's all over. Everything's gone, it's over." And he's weeping, and the kids are weeping, and the family who's evacuated, who's staying with us, whose children attend the school at Lon Ramon, they're weeping. We're trying to figure out what to do. The Torah is on the table in the kitchen, so but what do we do? How do we gather? And then we find out, because Hashem is so good, it's so kind to us, that really it's just some back rooms in an office building, but it's okay. Phew. We're safe. We go through our day, we're calling, we're figuring out who's where, what's happening, what's going on in the chaos, and then it's time to go to do a baby naming, followed by services. The phone starts ringing, and mine's dinging, and his is dinging, and somebody found our house phone, and it said news people, and I'm like, "What is happening?" We're like, "Your school's on fire." They said, "No, it was on fire this morning, it's fine." We said it again, and we said it again. I said, no, really, the school is on fire. It had caught again. And he said, well, that's going to be the end of the school, I'm sure, because we can never rebuild. The fire burned, and it did consume, and we won't rebuild. And so we went into Shabbat, and people were gathering in the house. We were trying to find moments of comfort and peace and figuring out who's going on and what's happening and whose house is still intact and what's really going on. And to tell you the truth, Alon Ramon is okay. They're okay. Their families are okay, but there are so many people who are not okay. There are so many in our community for whom their camps burned down, their childhood memories, their life, their future, their residences burned down. There are rabbis in the community who lost their homes. There are congregants whose homes have burned down who will never be able to rebuild. They will never be able to navigate the system. There are people all around us who have faced horrific tragedies. How do we keep our faith? How do we comfort? How do we energize to move forward? Where out of the darkness will that light be that grows as a heartbeat? How do we gather communities and make them whole? We know across America there are tragedies after tragedies, and whether it be an earthquake, whether it be fire, whether it be floods, we are going to continue to face disasters. Some of us are still figuring out how to put those pieces back together. But we know, as rabbinic souls in this community, cantor souls and educating souls, that we have a job, not just this season, but in seasons to come. The people on this panel have faced fire specifically in their communities. We know that there are people who are not on this panel. Our camps are not sitting on this panel. But we know it's a community-wide endeavor. These are some of our rabbis who have words to share and thoughts to share and all different approaches that may be relevant as you're going into your high holiday season this year. It may be relevant in the future. But you being here listening is also giving presence to the pain that has been a part of the Los Angeles community. To be sitting, as we say, in the valley, in the darkness and in the hardship, that gives comfort to those who are on this panel. And we're hopefully going to learn from one another, some text, grounding spaces, and some places to jump forward from. Everybody in this group was deeply affected. And so thank you for giving them space, and hopefully their wisdom will help you in your future as well. Michael has gone through so much more than we could ever expect, and we're so grateful that you would take the time to be here. For the Malibu Jewish community, you lost your home. Your congregants lost their homes. Your flames licked the doorsteps of your synagogue. And yet you are here. So we're going to give Michael his space.
Hello. So, as you all know, this is a very daunting task, but we're just talking about the elephant in the room in Sherry's session. It's something that we have to address. The song that Ken so beautifully played, thank you, was written by our cantor Marcelo Gidlin, and he sang it on the second Havdalah after the fire, when we were finally able to get our community together for the first time.
Can you talk a little louder?
It was by our cantor Marcelo Gidlin. He played it on the second Havdalah, the first time our community was able to come together after the fire. The idea for it actually came from a synagogue in Barcelona that I happened to visit with my wife on our honeymoon. They did something similar, and it always struck me as a really powerful thing that in Spain, 500 years later, they sing that verse every week after their services as sort of their anthem. And it came to me after the fire, this verse. And as I was looking at preparation for today, you can see it up there on the board. It's actually a very appropriate verse for engaging with this during high holidays. And I just want to very quickly give some frame for it, and then very quickly some of the points that I think that at least I will try and share about what it means in the big picture in terms of content. So just ways to connect. Feel free to use the story of our synagogue, and then we sang this song after the fire as a community for the first time, saying that, a lot of our town burned down, but our community is still here. We've not been consumed. Similar in Barcelona. You notice at the end of Moses' experience here, he says, Hineni, which of course is a word that resonates with Rosh Hashanah in particular. Also, Vayera and Vayar, the first verse there. Moses at first, something appears to him. He catches a glimpse of this angel. And then he looks again, Vayar, and he really gazes and he sees something. So those are also words that resonate. And I'm going to talk about those in just a moment. But the other thing that comes to mind, and I think I'm probably going to be using this as well, also connects to Abraham. If you're familiar with the Midrash of how he saddles his own donkey, right? And Joseph does the same. And then later on, Paro and Bilam also saddle their donkeys. There's a beautiful Midrash that I learned from my teacher, Benjamin Hollander Zal, who teaches that love and hate, there's a Midrash on this, love and hate upset the natural order of things. Well, fire does also. So if you want to use love and hate, which is something I think we also need to talk about in these high holidays, it's a nice way to bridge to the story of Abraham and how fire disrupts the natural order of things, which grabs Moses' attention here. So the question that I'm going to ask is, when he sees this marvelous sight, I'm going to ask the question, is there anything that was not burned? Can we see that? What are the things that when we look back on this and do a double take, can we see? And obviously we have to be very sensitive because it's been so traumatic for so many people. But the truth is, if they're there on our holidays, and our community is going to be there, it's not been consumed. We're still there. And I have to say, here's the content part. I think the things that really stand out in our community is the tremendous sense of compassion and chesed that was going around our community. Just everyone helping one another. It was truly remarkable. And in that sense, community, everyone in Malibu at least, I'm sure in your community as well, as a result of those fires, it has so much, I think, more understanding and connection and appreciation for the way community connects people and helps people and supports people. Another thing I think that people saw is this tremendous sense of caring, both giving care to other people and feeling cared by other people. People were calling them, making sure they were okay, everyone who needed help. Especially in our community, not everyone has been in a dependent situation. Not everyone, certainly not myself as well, have ever received a handout. And it's a profound experience, and it profoundly affects how you give. Another thing that I think is really profound that people felt was a sense of contribution. Everyone was giving exuberantly, and yet everyone knew they personally could not solve this problem or take care of everything. Everyone was a part of this greater whole, and all of us together were working to solve things. And then lastly, if it might be helpful for you, I think a sense of context can be really helpful. I think this is what Moses tries to do in this verse as well. He's seeing this flame, he's trying to understand what it means. And so again, this is it's challenging with people who lost things, and because everyone's loss is so deeply personal and different, and you have to respect the differences of loss. Nevertheless, I think we all learned a lot about a sense of transiency, perhaps ironically so in Malibu, where a house is a really, really big deal and very much at the center of people's lives. A sense of non-attachment. It's been profound to see the rebirth, especially we saw it in the nature, in the greenery, but we've seen it in the people as well. We're beginning slowly to see it with rebuilding. Fire is a very revealing thing. Not only can you see the landscape, but it also revealed the lack of preparedness and the challenges that are still in front of us. Like here too, Moses saw some angels, and there were a lot of angels that people got to see. Those who stayed and fought the fires and saved people's houses. You ask the question, would they do it again? However, knowing the dangers. People acted on instinct, but like Moses, we can look a second time and we can reconsider. It raises issues for people. Can you rebuild something that was lost? Can you try and copy it? Or is it better to let the past be the past and respect it and appreciate it for what it was? And what can you do but to go forward, but it necessarily has to be in a different way? Or do you side with some of the people who are trying to recreate what was? So without being judgmental, those are all sorts of issues that are on the table that people are facing, and this is what we're going to be addressing. And so feel free to use any of those. And I really recommend that song. It's very easy. As you heard, people can pick it up very easily. And I think it's a very profound message for our community this time. Thank you.
We offer our condolences to Paul, who has walked out of Shiva to walk into this room today to be with us, to share with us. And so our hearts 100% with you. I want to be able to lift you this season as your words were with us today.
Shiva ended last night. This is my walk around the block. I had to go somewhere. Shiva ended yesterday. This is my walk around the block. And I had to go somewhere. And I have to teach it sometime. And so I figured the safest place would be with colleagues. It feels that way, mostly. In order for the soul, Rabbi, hear me out a moment, in order for the soul to exist in the material world, it must be clothed in a body through which the soul may achieve its purpose. For this reason, we must supply the body with its existential needs, like food, water, sleep, and exercise, without which the body could not exist, the soul could not fulfill its potential. If you need, real Rabbi, Rambam said, maintaining a healthy body is among the ways of serving God, since it's impossible for one who is not healthy to understand or know anything of the Creator, etc., etc. The first one was a real Rabbi, but we like text. But, forgive me for sitting with another strike. Caring for the body, mind, heart, and soul. We can't do anything else unless we do that. We rabbis, particularly those of a certain generation, were, are, will be really bad at taking care of ourselves. But not me. I've done spiritual direction multiple times. I do writing as a spiritual practice. I went to the Institute for Jewish Spirituality and can meditate and yoga aid and all that stuff. I led conventions for the CCAR and for my own congregation and community on self-care and on mental health and wellness. And I'm totally into therapists. I'm a therapist dream because I've been doing it since my early 20s, and I go in and do the work and they get paid. And then the fires hit. And 80% at least of my congregation in the end was evacuated, under a mandatory evacuation. So I helped lead a coalition in the valley to get up and running the next morning. We put together a kids camp and an adult hangout, and we called our congregation, I think 4 times over the course of it, and others did and helped other people do it with Rabbi Julie Weiss and Ben Goldstein and others. And the work on one hand was really heroic, and we partnered with the Federation, partnered with others, and really helped deal with the needs of what could have been, what was devastating, could have been more. And people said how heroic it was. I told that to my mom and dad. And then something happened, which in the fires has been a gift because it's going to get me through this Shiva. And by the way, in March, on one day, my wife's mother died unexpectedly, and 2 hours later, while I was on the other coast, my mother had a stroke, her second stroke, and I had to stay with them and miss my wife's mother's funeral because someone had to care for my folks until my siblings could get down there. My wife's decision. When the fires hit, after about a week of 22/7 calls, the Federation called the local people and worked with our crisis counselor and whatever. We were doing great work. Bringing a therapist in to help everybody, staff talk and deal with it. I hit the wall. How did I know I hit the wall? Because I brought in my rabbinic coach to meet with me and Rabbi Julia, mainly to help her, because she was fraying at the edges. And as we had the conversation and let our rabbinic interns watch, we both fell apart. After a week, decided to take a day off, even though we couldn't. And I agreed to it because my wife, who I talked to a little later, right as we were deciding, she was in the room, I think, whispered to me, if you don't take this day off, Julia won't take this day off. And I cared about her well-being more than my own. And so I did, and I woke up at 4:30 in the morning sobbing. And I was on a conference call the next day, Zoom thing, and I kept going off to check my phone and get back on, but I was really crying in between. And by the end of that day, I had met with my therapist and met with a spiritual counselor through the CCAR, and met with Sally Weber, who's a social worker and one of the greats of Jewish Family Service. I was doing all the things that I did before, but guess what? Like many of us, I stopped doing all that stuff regularly. I lost my spiritual practice, and I hit the wall. And I started experiencing secondary trauma, and I started experiencing guilt that I was not. I lived in Tarzana. My house is fine. I had a fun sleepover with Julia and the 3 kids, and got to play Uncle Paul because they had to move out. And then I'd go back and help, and then I'd leave. And most of my people were fine, except for the ones that weren't. I had a conversation with Sally Weber, and she said, "What's going on?" I said, two things. The first time we had that conversation, I said, I can't stop. She said, I think you have to. I said, but there are so many people in need. And she said, in order for you to do your stuff, says the text, you got to take care of yourself. And the second time we met, she said, how you doing? And I said, I feel like an imposter. And everybody keeps telling me I'm a hero. And she said, why? I said, because there's so many people in need and I cannot help them all. She says, well, what's your expectation? I said, to find out who's in need and to help them. And then she said to me, well, then what's a slightly lower one? I said, I guess triage and have other people help the people in need. And she said, what's a slightly more realistic expectation? And I said, to let people know I'm here, and, or she said this, let people know you're there, and the ones who need you will seek you out. What did I learn from the fires? I learned from the stories that most of us have heard, that whether it's the fires, or a death, or an earthquake, or a miscarriage, a breakup of a relationship, a abusive ward, an abusive congregation, or whatever, most of us, at least 2 times, are going to hit a trauma. And most of us will not handle it well. We'll end up with great sermons afterwards, and we will deal with it really well afterwards, once we get through the hell. But most of us aren't keeping up our spiritual practices, aren't taking care of everything we're doing. So, at the Shabbat service, I talk about the trauma the rabbi was going through for 2 reasons. One is so they would take care of themselves, because if I could talk about it, then they could see the way. And 2 is so that they would know that I know how to take care of myself. And the last thing I'll say is, we all know it's going to happen to us at some point, but we think it won't. So it happened to me, and I got lucky because now that my dad died, I now have the skills to get through this one. So thank you.
We know that this session's going a little bit longer. If you give us the grace, we'll continue forward. Paul will be the person at your side if you're going through your trauma. And so today I'll ask that you be by his side, but know that he'll have your back, be with you going forward. Lisa is from Ventura County, and let me tell you, she's been, do you want to go next? So it's all in that electronic packet. And then we thought we would reject the text. So Lisa's going because her text was up. I did them out of order, my apologies. So Lisa's from Ventura County, and when you talk about fires and you talk about the devastation, there's no words for what you witnessed and what you saw. And I know that when we smell like a nice campfire, some of us are excited and others of us have rapid heart rates and anxiety attacks. So we're anxious to hear your words and your wisdom.
Thank you, Sarah. My story actually does include Paul.
Sure.
Very closely, Ventura County, the Thomas Fire. This was December 4th of 2017. A fire that started in Santa Paula that just spread so quickly westward toward Ventura and eventually hit the coast and then headed upward. It's a fire that burned for 5 weeks and took over, I think, like 280,000 acres. At the time was the biggest wildfire in California. This fire moved so quickly, it was consuming an acre a second. I can't even wrap my head around that, to tell you the truth. We at the temple were fortunate. Some of you kind of know this in your own communities, but if you think about it, we have a road called Foothill Road that just goes right along the foothills, and everything to the north of it is beautiful, beautiful agricultural land, and then becomes very residential. It's beautiful homes that can look out into the ocean. The temple sits on Foothill Boulevard, Foothill Road, just on the south side. So we saw the fire come through. Our building was not harmed, but at 4 o'clock in the morning, I stood outside taking the Torahs out of the sanctuary and loading them into the back of my van, and was able to see the neighborhood right across the street on fire, take a picture of that, know that I had congregants' homes on that hillside that were burning. About 500 structures were destroyed in that fire very quickly. We had about 14 families in the Jewish community that did lose their home. About 10 of them were temple members, a couple of young people who were renting homes that lost all of their possessions. And I'll talk in a minute about the community's response, at least just a quick part of that. But part of the devastation for Ventura wasn't just the fire coming through, but because of the way the winds blow in from the ocean, the smoke just sat over downtown Ventura, over half of Ventura, for an enormous amount of time. And so the smoke damage from that fire was immense. I don't even know how many people from our community were evacuated, but evacuated for weeks before they could even move back in and reclaim their land. So when we talk about who by fire, Part of what I realized from that is the randomness of tragedy carries a deep impact. It's the randomness of how fire moves and skips, that you can drive into the hillsides and see entire streets that are gone, and then a house that is standing, and then more houses that are destroyed, or houses that are up higher that you would think would have burned that are intact, but the lower streets in the neighborhoods that were burned out. So we had congregants who lost homes, and we had people who had their homes remain standing, but everything around them was gone. Their neighbors' houses were gone. And that incredible sense of randomness that affects all of us. The emperor that jumps across Foothill Boulevard and then destroys a home or one particular street in an area where no other homes are destroyed. That was a part of the trauma of what we were experiencing. But I have to say that when I come to the Unatana Toka, for me, whatever the conditions are, it's always the end of that prayer that brings meaning. When we come to Utshuva, Tzedakah, Tefillah, lessen this terrible decree. And so I really want to share with you how those three pieces, I think, helped us through this tragedy. The first is tshuva, and the way I want to interpret tshuva is about somebody, not in the notion of repentance, but in the idea of turning around from your own daily trajectory to see the pain, to see the loss, changing direction. And that came to us from a phone call from Rabbi Stephanie Kramer in Santa Rosa, who had gone through this devastation 2 months before, who immediately, from her own world, changed her trajectory, picked up the phone, called us, and was an incredible guide for how to walk through every single day in those first few days, every few hours, what I should be doing, how I should be responding, how do you begin to triage. That second change of trajectory was Paul Kipnes, who was at the URJ in Boston, far away, who immediately stepped out of what he was doing in his own orbit, picked up the phone and called and said, "What can I do for you?" And he asked that question just moments after Stephanie Kramer said to me, well, the first person who says, "What can I do for you?" you say to them, "Send us Shabbat dinner." So I said, "Paul, send us Shabbat dinner." And he said, "I'll get right back to you." And they did. That first Shabbat, when my community was so devastated, when homes had been lost and people had been evacuated, here his community came in and brought us Shabbat dinner, underwrote that so we could come together and be in our place and find strength together. That was incredible. So that notion, the takeaway for me was when I'm in my own headspace, when I'm busy with my own stuff that's on the plate, when I see that there's someone else who's in need that I have a unique ability to respond to, put it all down, change your trajectory, tshuva, change, and reach out and help and be there when you can. The second piece was definitely tzedakah and the number of gift cards, the number of checks, the community response, the federation here called, we're not even in this federation's orbit, but the sense of being remembered and being cared about by congregations all over this country was so overwhelming. And at tzedakah, it wasn't just the need for it. Oh my God, I've never seen so many gift cards in my life. But it was the message underneath it. You're not going through this alone. We can help you. We're here to support you. Was completely overwhelming. I mean, that's really what it's about. It was about we weren't alone. There was a human response. There was a communal response. There was a Jewish response to us in what we were going through. And the last piece I think I'd say was Utfilah, being able to come together that first Shabbat. The second Shabbat was Shabbat Hanukkah. You know, instead of lighting candles of joy, we were traumatized by candles, by light, by fire. We had to somehow reclaim, and we did that in Tefillah and with Shabbat. We had to reclaim fire as a holy item, not a destructive item. And that was tremendous for us. So we reclaimed or we used tefillah to bring us together. We had a joint service with the congregation in Santa Barbara. We actually did 2 of them. We've never done that before. But that fire progressed up the PCH, and if you remember, it cut off the 101, and Santa Barbara was isolated during that time period of Montesino mudslides that completely devastated that community. They lost a member of their congregation who died in the mudslide. So a few months later, we invited them to come and have Shabbat with us. They did. They came and had Shabbat dinner, members of their congregation. 2 months later, we went up the road and had Shabbat with congregation B'nai B'rith. We'd never done that before, but it was this important moment of saying, we're not alone, and we're linked by this tragedy, and we need each other. A very powerful moment for us. And then High Holidays rolled around. And at this moment, I want to reach out to Naomi Levy, because last year at the High Holidays seminar, we talked about visioning Yizkor differently. I hope some of you were in that session. You talked about writing, having people write, and it was just a wonderful response. It just got me thinking about Yizkor differently. And so this year for Yizkor, as we lit there were 7 or 8 candles that are the Mishkan HaNefesh. I had invited members of my congregation to write their own poetry and to stand and read it. It felt that somehow we needed to have an Azkara for the houses that were lost. And to understand that as people say, it's just a thing, I'm fine, we were okay, it's just stuff. It's not just stuff. Your house is filled with the effects of your life. And to lose all of that is as if you are losing part of your history. It is the remembrances of all of the experiences and the events of your life. And they're really sacred. So I felt like, a little bit, as Paul said, a little bit of an imposter. My home was fine. How could I write a poem? I felt compelled to write a poem, but how could I speak for people who did lose something? So I wrote a poem that I sent to my friend Nan, who did lose her home. And she brought her own personal experiences into this. And this is the Azkara for houses that we read last year at Yizkor. I mourned the walls last year when we lost our home. The sound of the Santa Anas rattling the windows on those winter nights. How the sounds, smell, feel of a house can live in you. Be so much a part of your body, like the cells under your skin that are there, unseen, giving you shape and substance, protecting what lives within. How to mourn the houses that are gone. I can't say lost, for there's nothing to be found. Not the menorah we bought in Fairfax when we were first married, or the dolphin quilt our daughter sewed in 4-H, or the faded photo of a little boy and his mother soon after their arrival at Ellis Island. That boy to become my father. Like the ancient priest's burnt offering, this Azkara, wholly consumed, there is nothing left on the altar, except I don't imagine God could be pleased with this sacrifice. Wholly gone, but holy indeed. Every bit of it, every year lived, every day spent, every gone item, useless and valueless, now rendered precious. An Azkara for my house, gone in December's fire, remembered in every waking moment. It is not the deceased that needs to rest in peace. It is me. And I think it was really healing to our congregation, that was the elephant in the room, to be able to acknowledge that at the High Holidays and speak of it. And I can tell you that of the families that lost their homes, none of them are back in their homes yet. Most are in some stages of rebuild, but 20 months later, they are not there. And for me, I make myself drive up in the hills every few months and look at what it looks like for 2 reasons. First, because on the surface it can look like everything is fine in a community. People are dressed, they're in their clothes, they go to work, they drive about, they're in the grocery store. And that to not go and look at it would make me think that everything is back to normal. So when I drive up on the hillsides and I see the empty lots or the houses that are just beginning to be rebuilt, or still see burned trees, it's a reminder of what's really underneath and what's not always apparent, but that there's still a trauma and that there are still families and people that are living that trauma. And the second reason to go up is to see that rebuilding is happening and regrowth is happening. That community will never be the same as it was. Some things have moved away, and the trauma of dealing with insurance companies is a whole other trauma to talk about. But it's important to remember that life does go on and rebuilding does happen. Thank you.
Chasen is recognizing the time. We're going to give him just a few minutes and then we'll close.
Yeah, my story is not all that dissimilar from the ones you've heard, so I'm going to probably just try to give you one additional lens through which to see it, textually. Our experience at the same time as Lisa's, at the Thomas fire, at the same time as that was going on, the Skirball fire here in LA, on the Subliminal Pass. I got a phone call at 5 a.m. I was just about to leave for the URJ biennial from a congregant of ours who awakened me, said that she was looking at her television, and the synagogue was literally framed, surrounded by fire, because our synagogue sits on the pass. We have 5 acres where all the buildings are, 6 acres. It's also our property, that's the hillside, that the hillside was all ablaze. I turned on my television, saw the synagogue encircled in orange, and of course instantly thought I have to rush over to get the Torahs, figuring if it was too dangerous, the police would stop me, presuming that if I could get through, there would be firefighters who would cover me or help me. When I got to the temple, what I encountered was just unimaginable. Just mountains of fire face to face. That's, Michael talked a little bit about that piece of what you do with the rushing in and the looking back and what I have done differently. And that's the part I think I want to drill down into just a little bit, because I got there, no police to stop us because the fire moved so quickly. So no police yet, no firefighters yet, just me. And the hill is completely on fire, and the fire advancing very quickly, and wondering, what should I do? Should I just leave? Do I get the scrolls? Feeling very small, very vulnerable, and blown away by the immensity of what a fire like that looks like face to face. So I ran into our kitchen and got the kitchen cart, rolled it up onto the bima, and tried to pile as many Sifrei Torah to the cart as I could so that I could move quickly. There were 7 scrolls there, and we had a brand new big midrash that we had just built not even a year earlier, where the 8th scroll was, and I drove the fire lane down to get the last scroll. Still no firefighters, as I was ready to leave, and so now the fire is just completely engulfing the hills, and it's coming right down to the promenade where our buildings are just on the other side, and so I took a long look back. I thought to myself, it's been 15 years, we could do this again, we're just going to have to do it again. And of course thinking as well, obviously, of all the congregants like myself who were being under mandatory evacuation because of the danger of the fire. I found myself having to assimilate these images of these overwhelming visions that I saw and felt. Literally, as I was driving away, the heat of the fire pounding down on my car from the hills that were on fire just makes you wonder, will my car catch fire? The idea that it could penetrate the car, as it did, was kind of mind-blowing. Trying to assimilate these overwhelming visions that I saw and felt, and the trauma of this raging inferno being stuck very much in me, while knowing that I needed to mobilize, as Paul was talking about, to be a source of comfort and support for others. For the first time in my life, I truly felt at least a little of how some people, I think, see God in these kinds of extreme events. I mean, our Torah certainly speaks of all kinds of episodes in which God shows up in big and destructive ways. Except that's usually the part of the Torah that we try to teach away from. Usually if we're ever talking about that God, it's for the purpose of repudiating that vision of God. Sooner or later, though, and Paul alluded to this before, whether we ever look into the eye of a massive inferno like that, life has its own ways of displaying its suffocating bigness. And that was really what this was about, the suffocating bigness of the fire and the terrifying smallness of me in that moment. And so our terrifying smallness alongside, whether it's fire or earthquake, whether it's shooting or accident, Paul's community had to deal with shooting as well, whether it's heart attack or cancer diagnosis, it's hard sometimes to resist the temptation to see God in the huge and us in the small. And I think we've run into that in hospital rooms with people who are wondering why me, this diagnosis, and seeing in it punishment or judgment or consequence for choices, and imagining God somehow in that bigness, even the end of days. Blessedly, one of the Hebrew Bible's most famous texts teaches us how backward that kind of thinking is. Literally suggests we should see it backward. Eliyahu, symbol of the messianic yearning, emerges from his darkest hour when he fears that everything is going to be lost, and he says these words, which we all know: great and mighty wind, splitting the mountains, shattering the rocks, by the power of the Eternal, but the Eternal was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, and the Eternal was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, fire, and the Eternal was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice called Mabadaka. The smallness is where God is found. Similarly to what you've heard from some of the others, it was just 3 days after the fires that my congregants and I gathered outside the doors of the synagogue to make Havdalah. We couldn't go inside because we couldn't enter the buildings because of the smoke and ash damage and the remediation that would be necessary for many weeks before we could re-enter our buildings. But we were permitted to go to the property to make Havdalah. The challenge, though, is I had to think long and hard, as Lisa was kind of talking about before, about whether to light a Havdalah candle right next to a hillside that still has burning embers on it and that is still being patrolled by the LAFD. Would it seem irresponsible? Would it just be frightening? Would people be able to experience the spirituality of Havdalah in such an environment? Ultimately, I decided that we needed, just as Lisa was saying, we needed to reclaim that vehicle. Reclaim the small, redemptive vision of fire when we think of our spiritual home, the synagogue. Not the harrowing version that we had all seen, either for hours on television or those who had the unfortunate experience of seeing it up close and personal as I did. But I could see it in my congregants' eyes when we lit that fire, the candle. You could just see them. You could see the anxiety percolating. And you could see them watching as the flame was flickering in the wind and the sparks were kind of blowing off. And where were they blowing off to? There was a new heightened sensitivity that was about that bigness being where the fear sits. And I thought I felt like we really all needed to be retrained at some level in the aftermath of the trauma to see divine power in the smallness of that flame, not in the raging blaze that had terrorized some of us face to face and all of us as we watched it on television. television, and in all those small acts that brought redemption in the days, the weeks, the months that followed, being reminded, retrained in the face of all of these infernos in our lives. Somewhere beyond the suffocating bigness of what threatens us and the terrifying smallness that is us, resides the even smaller, even more powerful smallness of the Most Holy. The melody is Debbie Friedman's on the Shalom. The words familiar to us, perhaps seen in new ways because of these lived experiences, all of our shared lived experiences. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy, will reap in joy. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy.
Yasher Kochachem to everyone